Part 219. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2185. Manbao restrained his horse and looked back. Mr. Zhuang and the others smiled and waved to them when they saw them looking back. Lu Huan was worried. They'll be fine, right? Yin Or was not very worried, and said, if you can't beat it, just run. Run here first. If you can't, you can run to Liangzhou City. It's not very far from Liangzhou City, and you can get there in half a day. He said, my family will say, and it will be all right. Only then did Lu Huan feel at ease. That's good. Shall we go to herd with them? I have no interest in herding now, I just want to eat their meat. Zhou Liru, I want to check their health. If you have nothing to do, hit me up. She thinks it's not good for them to be too idle, and they will think wildly. Manbao and the others ran back to their camp. When Nikenjun saw them, he nodded and said, I'll have people wait in front of them. As soon as I find any trace of the army, I'll report it. Manbao dismounted, looked at the distant mountain and asked, they should also be able to find out, right? Nikenjun said, let's see how do an inspector wants to fight this battle. If you just want to snatch something, come directly and scare the people in the mountains away and search. If you want to wipe out all the people, you will definitely send people over first, and then you can attack at night. By the way, someone has confessed. Nikenjun said that he would behead his head after beheading, and take the head back to the tent for display, facing the thief who was still alive. When they recruited, Bai Erlang was in high spirits. What did they recruit? How many people are there on the mountain? What is the name of the first one, and how many levels are there from the moment you enter the mountain? Nikenjun said, I've asked everything I can. Bai Shan asked, are you asking separately? Nikenjun nodded, naturally, I asked them separately, otherwise it would be difficult to ask a lot of things if they were given the opportunity to collude with each other. Manbao asked, have you asked where they hid the treasure? I asked, and they all said that the place they knew was in the cottage. Manbao, impossible, the cunning rabbits have 3 caves, Duan Inspector broke them up twice, there is obviously Duan Inspector's mortal enemy here, but they always go here, not because they looted here. Money. Nikenjun naturally knew that it was impossible, but they just refused to confess, or they didn't know. What could he do? The remaining few have recruited a lot of things, and he can't still cut people down. Manbao frowned and thought for a moment, forget it, let's fight a battle first. Nikenjun. Bai Shan also felt that he should kill him first, and said to Manbao in private, if the leader of the bandit can be caught, things can be found out. If it doesn't work, there is still a little father-in-law. I will ask the little father-in-law for help. Manbao asked, is there a reward? Yes, Bai Shan and her winked, if we find it, I will talk to Nikenjun Duan Shishi, and we will choose a few more good things. If we come across something that my little father-in-law wants along the way, we can buy it. Down. Manbao made a plan and asked Keek in his heart, can you find it? Originally, Keek didn't intend to participate in their affairs, but Bai Shan said that, he felt that he could still participate, and he said, yes. When looking for unlisted creatures, just scan more underground or in rocks, but the loss will be a bit large in rocks. So it listed a list and gave it to Manbao, saying, you have to pay points. Manbao glanced at it, and with 80 points, she was still very good, so she nodded and said, no problem. One sentence answered both Bai Shan and Keek. So the two sides agreed on this. At noon, scouts from the north and south came to report, and the scouts from the north said, there is movement in the mountains, they should be searching the mountains. The scout from the south said, the Inspector Duan brought 1,000 soldiers and horses to 20 miles away, and he invited the adults to discuss the matter of suppressing the bandits. Manbao asked, does he want to come up again at night? Inspector Duan really wanted to come back at night. He had 4 experiences with horse thieves in this mountain. This was a big battle. Usually, he sent people to escort passing caravans and there were many small conflicts, so they were very friendly to each other. Learn. He said, the mountain is unobstructed all around. It is easy to be discovered when you go forward in the daytime. It has to be hidden a lot at night. My plan is to advance at night and ambush at the foot of the mountain, and then I can attack the mountain the next day. Nai joined the army and asked, where do you want to attack from? Duan Inspector discussed it with him. The two talked for half an hour. Manbao and the others sat on the sidelines and listened. They all understood, but they still didn't understand why they had to attack from the left. They're not good at things either. After discussing with Nai Kenjun, Duan Inspector assigned him 300 people and asked him to lead the team as a center. Bai Erlang looked around, raised his hand and asked, then what are we doing? Inspector Duan was stunned for a moment, then smiled. Second Master Bai is naturally staying in the camp with Lord Zhou and the others, waiting for the good news. What's the difference between that and going to his tower? Bai Erlang turned his head and asked Man Bao, are we going to his tower department to find Mr. and the others? Man Bao said, no, we will follow, and if a soldier is injured, I can also contribute. Bai Shan was still thinking about finding the treasure, and nodded again and again. The wounded soldiers were all sent to the rear for treatment. Thinking of this, Duan Inspector and Nai Shenjun had no objection. Man Bao also planned, let Li Rui come tomorrow. She just learned to sew, and this time she can just practice her hands. Bai Shan asked, have you brought enough gut strings? Many, several rolls, all well packed in boxes. If it's not enough, she can also buy imitations in the mall, which can basically be faked. That thread can also be used for sutures. But in Mr. Mo's place, it is used for pet sewing. So the two sides made a plan, because the base camp was still there, and in order to stabilize the military, they could not all run away, so Man Bao took Bai Shan and Bai Erlang back. The horse thieves in the mountain turned over most of the mountain during the day and did not find anyone, but found 2 more headless corpses and the corpses of 2 caravan men. The latter was cut down by their men, but it rolled down the hillside and smashed directly into the haystack, so I didn't see it. Ergo paced over and focused on the 2 headless corpses. They were placed with the headless corpse they found yesterday, and certain characteristics became more obvious. It's a soldier of Dajin, he said with a gloomy face. You can say that the 2 corpses found yesterday were accidents, but they were also beheaded in different places. Is this still an accident? Only people in the military would deliberately cut off people's heads or ears because they wanted to discuss military merit. The latter is still because the head is too big to carry, so the ears will be cut off, but obviously there are not many cases now, so it is better to use the human head to judge the merits and rewards. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2186. Ergo went to see his big brother. The leader's face sank, and he said, let's go out and look around. It's from the Liangzhou army or some other place. I've checked it out. Urge said, brother, I'm afraid that if you send someone out at this time, there will be no return. The head of the family frowned. Then what do you mean? Just stay on the mountain and wait? Cover your ears and cover your eyes. What's the difference between a blind and deaf person? I mean that they can't be scattered to look for it. It's late today. I'll take someone out to check it out in person tomorrow morning. After a day today, they can all go to Liangzhou City. What can they find out if they go to investigate now? The third master disapproved of pursuing this matter too much, and said, maybe it's a wandering soldier from somewhere that just happened to meet so. If they took action, I would say that they were unlucky, and killing the few remaining people in the stockade would be considered revenge for the brothers. Many people agree with the words of the third master. They like to loot, but they don't want to fight with the Liangzhou army again. The big boss and Urge frowned at the same time. Although they didn't want to fight the Liangzhou army, it was very heartbreaking for their subordinates to be so unwilling. The big boss waited, and in the end still agreed with Ergo's proposal. It's impossible not to check it out, secretly not knowing what opponents are lurking. It's quite scary to think about it. The big boss thought of something and asked, could it be the team you saw last night? Didn't you say they were the official army? Ergo's eyes moved, his face was a little condensed. We entered their camp last night, and there was nothing unusual. It must be them, the third master shouted. Is there any other officials near here besides them? There is no place to hide in the 4 fields. They couldn't have run very far yesterday. Urge said, the third brother just said that one day was enough for them to go to Liangzhou city. Why have they changed their minds now? The two immediately quarreled. In the end, the boss came forward to stop them, and then sent someone to investigate their camp. No one walked down the mountain today. They are either still where they were or returned to Liangzhou. If the former, it may have nothing to do with them. If the latter, they must have done it, he said. It's really these people who did it? I don't believe that they will go to the western regions and not take my path. Then, someone immediately led the way, and didn't come back until night to report, their camp is still there. Ergo felt strange and asked, what are they stationed there for? Why didn't they set off? We sent people to pretend to be herdsmen driving cattle and sheep to pass by, and said that their adults were very interested in the trajectory of the herdsman's migration, so they had to live in his tower for a while, he said. The little ones inquired. However, the adults of their family went to his tower department with a generous gift early this morning. I heard that they gave him a gift to the tower department yesterday evening, and it was delivered today. They brought a lot of cars and all the luggage on them was good. The box contains. Okay, we all know this, Ergo interrupted him, turning his head and saying to the boss, brother, I went to see those people last night, and some of them were particularly noble. The one headed the old man looks like a teacher, and we guessed last night that the chief officer of this team is a female imperial doctor from the capital. The third master asked, so what? Urge glanced at him and said, I heard that this imperial Dr. Zhou is very popular with the emperor, and he is still the prince. He has always lived in the palace, and he is very familiar with the people around the prince. With arrogance, he should be a noble person in the capital. The third boss's eyes lit up, he turned his head and said to the big boss, brother, this is a fat sheep, if we rob them. Urge, are you crazy to provoke this kind of person? They have a distinguished status. If something goes wrong, the Liangzhou army will definitely suppress the bandits vigorously. Grandmas, Duan Ge wouldn't let us go in the first place. Why don't we grab a big one and go away? Let's set up a village in another place. The people on the grasslands are different from those in the central plains. They don't have much fear of imperial power. Originally, their leader was a Khan more than 10 years ago, not the emperor in the central plains. Moreover, the capital's control over the grasslands was not that strong. Except for conscription and taxation, the imperial court had almost no requirements on the tribes, and the herdsmen were basically self-governing. Sometimes the clan has gone far, and with good luck, when other clans occupying the area are not paying attention, they slip away to other places at once. There are always 3 or 4 times that cannot be accepted. Under such circumstances, it is impossible to want the thieves to fear the emperor. Not to mention the cubs who came out of the capital nobles under the emperor. So the big boss was also moved, but it was only a moment. He didn't want to move the place, and he didn't want to face the Liangzhou army. Seeing his hesitation, Urge breathed a sigh of relief and said quickly, big brother, they are going to be officials in the western regions. Even if they are nobles, they bring a lot of things, but most of them are their daily necessities. I heard that those children of noble families are going out. Even a toilet has to be brought with it, what's the use of us grabbing it? He said, although the things are good and there are many, but not much can be realized, it is better to grab a caravan, and the goods in it can be realized. It is not worth changing places for them. Only then did the big boss firm up, that's right, it's not worth it to change places suddenly, third child, don't provoke them. The third master pouted. The head of the family said directly, if they leave in 2 days, restrain the people under them and let them go directly. Ergo agrees. The third master reluctantly responded. Only then did the big boss think about other things. How do they remember the trajectory of the migration of the Jia tribe? He wouldn't be so stupid to tell them such a terrible thing, right? That's the secret of the survival of the tribes. His tower department won't tell them, but it's not impossible to tell them some fake news or simply tell the trajectories of other tribes. Ergo's eyes were deep, but the court officials asked about this kind of thing. I am afraid that the emperor of the Central Plains is dissatisfied with the grassland and wants to take action on the grassland. It was also because of this guess that Ergo did not suspect Joe Man and the others that they would not leave the camp. The emperor in the palace sneezed, picked up the handkerchief and wiped his face. He glanced outside before closing his clothes. Strange, don't you feel cold? Gu Zhong silently poured a cup of hot tea for the emperor and said with a smile, maybe it's your highness who misses your majesty. The emperor immediately said, I'm afraid someone is scolding me, right? Bai Shan stood at the wind vent, watching the afterglow disappear little by little. The sky was completely dark, and there was no movement on the mountainside. He was relieved. Nai Kenjun strode forward, frowned and asked, young master Bai, did you send someone to tell us that we want to find out about the herdsman's migration trajectory? See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2187. Bai Shan nodded. Urge is a suspicious person, and he would doubt us if he didn't have a suitable reason. There's no need for such an excuse, right? It was rumored that the emperor wanted to attack the grassland, and everyone was a little nervous. However, this matter has come from their mouths and entered the ears of horse thieves. Nai Kenjun comforted himself in this way, and felt less guilty about the emperor and the Ministry of War. He followed Bai Shan's gaze to the mountain over there, looked at it for a while, and said, Master Bai, it's getting late, go back. Bai Shan nodded and turned back to the camp. Nai Kenjun was one step behind him, walking behind him to look at him, only to think that the people who can pass the Jinshi examination are not ordinary people, especially those who have passed the examination at such a young age. Their brains are much smarter than theirs, and their hearts are also dark. After Nai joined the army, he remembered this man 3 or 4 years ago. When he was younger, he dared to sue the emperor in vain, and he dragged the king of Yizhu down. Nai Kenjun shivered. Man Bao and Bai Erlang found out that Nai Kenjun was a lot more polite to Bai Shan, and let Bai Shan go first when they sat together for dinner at night. Man Bao and Bai Erlang looked at Nai Kenjun together, then turned to look at Bai Shan. Bai Shan's expression remained unchanged. After receiving the food, he thanked him and asked, when will Governor Duan and the others leave? Nai Kenjun said, at night when people sleep the most soundly. Said to be the deepest sleep time, it really was the deepest sleep time. Bai Shan and the others were already alert enough at night, but Duan Inspector and the others were not woken up by Deji until they reached the camp. When I put on my clothes and looked outside, I saw a large army standing neatly on the grass. The cavalry was in front and the infantry was in the back. Man Bao gathered up his clothes and asked Duan Inspector, are you going now? Inspector Duan said, it's almost dawn, let the soldiers eat first, then surround the mountain, and enter the mountain at dawn. Man Bao nodded. The three of Manbao rode on horses to watch the fun. No, they went to help. Zhou Liru and Lu Huan also ran over. They were called to help, Yin or wanted to come too, but they were stopped by their generals. He is not good at equestrianism, so it's hard to escape, run. Upon meeting Duan Inspector's gaze, Lu Huan cleverly changed his words. When the sky was bright, Duan Inspector ordered the infantry to go up the mountain quietly from two directions. All the troops who led the team had experience in suppressing bandits. They had been up the mountain twice before, and they were still familiar with the mountain. After waiting for the people to enter, Duan Inspector arranged for people to ambush in the direction where the horse thieves might escape, and Nikenjun also led a team of soldiers and horses with his own people to leave. There were only a few soldiers and a dozen guards left beside Manbao. Inspector Duan didn't leave either, he had to command the overall situation here, so after everything was arranged, he said to Manbao, "Master Zhou, did you see the tent set up over there?" Manbao nodded, "That's where the military doctor is, and I'll trouble Lord Zhou in the rear." Manbao could only look at the mountain regretfully, and led Zhou Liru to the tent to prepare. Bai Erlang and Lu Huan, who had planned to keep up, saw that Bai Shan didn't move, so they didn't move either. Duan Inspector was accompanied by a military doctor. Although most of the soldiers who were sent down after being injured would still die, it was better than nothing. There was only one military doctor, and when Manbao arrived, he met the other party and went to check the medicinal materials they brought. Medicinal herbs, there are very few types, but fortunately, they are all useful for trauma. After checking it, Manbao said, "Give these into powder first." He picked out another 6 kinds of herbs and asked Zhou Liru to take the medicine boys from the army to divide them into portions. Seeing that this prescription had never been used before, the military doctor on the side couldn't help but say, "Master Zhou, don't wait for the injured to be sent down before prescribing the right medicine. Manbao Dao, isn't it just a quick word to see injuries in the army? As far as the herbs you brought, this is the best combination I can think of to stop bleeding and save life. What flavors do you usually use to stop bleeding and stimulate patients?" Medicine. The military doctor said 2 recipes, and Manbao said, "It's still not as good as this recipe to stop bleeding." The two discussed it, and finally the military doctor was persuaded by her to go with Zhou Liru to weigh the medicinal materials and wrap them in paper. Manbao was guzzling and hammering the medicine and asked curiously, "Aren't you guys usually prepared?" The military doctor said, "Naturally, it is prepared, but this time the adults are in a hurry, and we only have time to prepare the medicinal materials." Manbao nodded and asked how they dealt with the trauma. "What else can be done?" "The medicine that should be applied, the bandaging that should be bandaged, the digging that should be digging a hole, and even the sawing that should be sawed off." The military doctor said, "The soldiers who were sent down were not seriously injured, but half of them died of blood loss. After the wounds deteriorated, half of them died. Only half of them survived." Manbao frowned, she listened to it and asked, "Aren't you sutured?" The military doctor's eyes lit up, "I have heard people talk about this medical technique, and I heard that there is a Dr. G in the Taiyuan hospital. Many military doctors know this, but I tried it with rabbits, and only 2 of the 10 rabbits survived. The situation not so good." "Manbao, how did you try?" "How else can I try? Cut a knife on the rabbit and sew it on." Zhou Liru said, "We have to face the texture, and we also need to take some measures to stop the bleeding." She was surprised, "Don't the doctors in the army teach you before?" The military doctor said embarrassedly, "The military doctor in the past died in the battle, and then the Liangzhou army has never been able to recruit a military doctor. I used to be Dru Fang when I was humble, and I made a little mistake when passing Liangzhou city, so I was caught." He was a military doctor in the army. In fact, he knows a few prescriptions, and prescribes 2 medicines for abdominal pain and cough. After being arrested in the military, he still learns many things now. Man Bao was amazed and asked, "How many years have you been in the army?" "It's been 4 or 5 years. I've followed every time the Liangzhou army went to battle, and I've saved a lot of people, so I'm still quite proud." Man Bao nodded and told him what to pay attention to when stitching. Seeing that he listened carefully, she said, "You can practice your hands with us when they are delivered." The military doctor said, "How can you delay the adults to save people? It is better to save people first, and then ask the adults to give pointers." He felt that as long as he had seen it, it should not be difficult to learn. His needlework is still very good, and he sewed and mended the clothes of many people in the army. Man Bao nodded, and when the medicinal materials were ready, she asked someone to boil water. She pulled out her medicine box and took out various knives, scissors, clips, and needles. There is also a box of wires. The catgut was well placed in a bag, and the bag was placed in a box. Zhou Liru took it to scald and wash it. This is the first time the military doctor has seen such a complete set of things. He has never seen many tools before, so he can't help but be stunned. Man Bao looked at his expression and thought, should there be a special training class for military doctors in the Imperial Physician's office? Let the army send military doctors who are interested in learning to study for a while and then send them back. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2188. Bai Shan followed the first group of wounded soldiers down. He went to wash his hands as soon as he got on the horse, and then he didn't know where to find 3 hoodies, gave one to Bai Erlang and Lu Huan, and then surrounded himself with one. He rolled up his sleeves while looking for Man Bao. Man Bao was standing in front of a wooden bed built up and cutting off the clothes on the person. When he saw him coming, he said, "Come and fight for me, Li are you can handle a patient yourself." Seeing that she was a little flustered, knowing that she had never dealt with patients, she might feel flustered, so she said, "Treat the minor injuries first, and leave the others to me and the military doctor." I am afraid that the medical skills of the military doctor are not as good as Zhou Liru, but he is more experienced. No matter what his medical skills are, he is not panicked, his hands are not shaking, he should stop the bleeding, and prescribe the medicine, and he is doing it in an orderly manner. The methods are not very clever, and the prescriptions prescribed are not very good. But the latter has a prescription that Man Bao prescribes in advance. The former, the injured person sent at this time either had their arms or legs chopped off, as well as their backs and stomachs. One of them was slashed in the neck, it was a little too long, and most of it was on the shoulders, but when it was delivered, it was almost dead. So at this time, I don't pay attention to how brilliant medical skills are, just to stop the bleeding quickly and save my life before I can say anything else. Man Bao held down the wound that was cut in the neck, and stopped when the bleeding was halfway through. She paused, raised her head and said to Bai Shan, "No need." Then he turned his head to the veteran soldier who was obedient to the side and said, "Next, bring up the one who was cut in the stomach first." The veteran suggested, "Sir, save the minor ones first. Although they will send the survivors down, we also have to make trade-offs. These are usually treated last." That's right, military doctors generally choose to treat from the middle of the road, and then the slightly injured person, but the seriously injured person. If he can live long enough to make time to save him, he will be saved. Because serious injury means a high probability of death, they will give hope of survival to moderate and mild injuries first. Man Bao said, "They have a very high survival rate here, and they will be sent to Zhou Liru with minor injuries." Bai Shan said to Bai Erlang and Lu Huan who were standing aside, "Go and fight Li Ru." Bai Erlang was a little more adept at medical theory, and Zhou Liru could still find whatever medicine he wanted. Lu Huan was basically blind, so she could only hold down if she wanted to, and hand over the scissors if she wanted to. The veteran who was in the hospital tent had no choice but to carry him with a slash in the stomach and put him on the wooden board. There are 3 wooden boards in the hospital tent, all of which are built high with stones, and then the wooden boards are placed on top, neither high nor low, just to facilitate their movements. He was slashed in the stomach, and a portion of his intestines came out. Because there are many injuries, more injuries will definitely be sent later, so I can't be as particular here as in the capital. Man Bao frowned, but he didn't ask for much. Teacher Mo once taught 2 lessons on the psychological adjustment of doctors during the war. At that time, he said a sentence that she remembered very deeply: as a doctor, you must know how to adjust yourself in a timely manner, and give up some in a specific environment in order to maximize the benefits. Now is not the time to be particular, at least the medical bills of the Liangzhou army are not yet capable of meeting her requirements. Man Bao picked up the scissors and quickly cut off his clothes. Bai Shan threw the clothes aside and turned to get hot water. Man Bao threw the cut intestines into a wooden barrel beside him, carefully stuffed the treated intestines back into his stomach, and then took the needles that Bai Shan had strung together and quickly sewed them together. After she finished sewing, Bai Shan began to take over the dressing and dressing. Man Bao watched for a while, and after making sure that he could do it independently, he pulled the needle out of the patient's body and turned to go to another wooden bed to see the patient of the military doctor. The military doctor had just dealt with a minor injury, and after bandaging the man, he sent him down. At this time, a man with a severed thigh was sent, and he came out with a saw and was about to saw his leg. Seeing that, Man Bao couldn't help but stop. After checking it, he said, "The legs can be kept." "No, not to mention that it will be difficult to heal afterwards, but right now, if he doesn't saw off his leg, he won't be able to live much longer if the bleeding can't be stopped." While giving him a needle to stop the bleeding, Man Bao asked, "How do you stop the bleeding after the saw?" "Fire." Man Bao frowned, "Not to say that this method is not good, but not very good," she said. "There is also a risk of decay after sawing the legs, and the survival rate is not high." "I know, the military doctor has not seen how many people's legs have been sawed in the past 4 or 5 years. Half of them won't survive." Man Bao said, "I can stop the bleeding, protect his legs first, and then see if there is no sign of surviving after 3 days." The military doctor knew that she was talking about legs, but the veteran soldier on the side didn't know, and said in shock, "If no one is alive, will they have to saw their legs?" The military doctor waved his hand, Go, we're talking about legs, not people, hurry up and boil the medicine, you are too slow to boil the medicine." The veteran was aggrieved, "All the stoves and pots are used, but I can keep 10 pots by myself, and I have to have pots for me. The cauldron of the army is not very big, and a cauldron can boil up to 5 people's medicine." He has tried his best, okay. Man Bao has already started to bury her head to deal with the wound on her thigh, and soon began to sew it up. Seeing the bright eyes of the military doctor, she began to explain while suturing. Zhou Liru's speed was a little slower. Fortunately, the injuries that were sent to her were relatively minor, but they would be dragged off the battlefield, no matter how light they were. Like the one that was slashed in a non-vital place, the blood flow was not fierce and rushed out, and it basically did not meet the standard of the next battlefield. It was the first time she was in charge of a patient by herself, and she was still a little flustered. Bai Erlang handed her scissors and scrubbed the wound while muttering, "Can you do it? This piece of meat is dead, so why don't you cut it off?" Seeing that her forehead was sweating, Lu Huan wiped the sweat from her forehead with a handkerchief, and said to Bai Erlang, "Shut up, can you say a few words less?" Zhou Liru was completely focused, completely ignoring the two of them, removed the bad flesh from the injured body, and began to sew up. Human flesh and pig flesh are still very different. Zhou Liru took several needles to find the feeling, and as his heart slowly calmed down, the movements of his hands became much smoother, and he gradually became better. After Man Bao took care of the patient with the injured thigh, 2 soldiers hurried in with a stretcher and shouted, "This is our army." He fell off his horse. Man Bao turned to look and said with just one look, "Put it on the bed." He was trampled by a horse. What else is there to do? The military doctor glanced at it and said, "No way." As soon as he finished speaking, the man on the stretcher closed his eyes. Man Bao reached out and touched the other's neck, and it was indeed impossible. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2189. Bai Shan asked, "The horse thief escaped?" Yes, they rushed out of a gap, and an inspector personally led someone to chase. We were stopped at the front when we joined the army, and we were slashed and fell off. Bai Shan said, "There will be many people who fall off the horse, and there are also people who have been stabbed in the chest." Man Bao counted the hemostatic medicines, and immediately prescribed several prescriptions to a medicine boy. "Go grab the medicine immediately. If there is not enough here, send someone to pick it up from my camp in the rear." They only replenished the medicinal materials in Liangzhou City a few days ago. The talent went out, and immediately someone carried the person and flew here. I fell off the horse and was trampled. Man Bao glanced at his trampled leg and said, "Saw it?" The military doctor had already brought out the saw, and he handed it to Man Bao, but Man Bao shook his head and said, "Come on, I'm not skilled." Man Bao doesn't have this experience, and he hasn't even tried it on anthropomorphic models before, but the military doctor is very experienced. Others may be poor, but sawing his legs is still very good. The soldier had already fainted from pain, and Man Bao gave him a needle to relieve the pain, and also to protect his heart and life, and then everyone started to work. While looking for the position to saw the leg, the military doctor explained to Man Bao how to cut off the leg so that the bleeding would be less. Man Bao listened carefully and gave him a shot. The unconscious man woke up in pain. Bai Shan quickly stuffed him with a cloth plug. Man Bao glanced at him and said, "Give him Ma Bo San first, it will cause cardiac arrest if it hurts too much." While talking, I changed the needle method, trying to reduce his pain as much as possible. The military doctor's hand paused, and he also had a prescription for pain relief, but the one left by the previous military doctor was the one memorized by the old medicine boy who used to follow the old military doctor. The efficacy of the medicine is average, better than nothing, so. Seeing that the military doctor was stunned, Man Bao turned his head and said to Bai Shan, "Go and catch it." Bai Shan nodded and turned to leave. He knows the formula of Ma Fei San. Man Bao stopped the bleeding with acupuncture and turned to treat other patients first. Soon Ma Fei San was delivered, and when the medicinal effect took effect, they started to move on. The legs were sawed off and thrown into the barrel, and then Man Bao began to wrap and sew. In these military doctors, he can't help. He knows how to saw the legs to avoid the main blood vessels and nerves, and the bleeding is less, and the burns are more likely to heal after the event, but he really doesn't know much about suturing. Man Bao carefully handled the incision, sutured to stop the bleeding, and then applied the medicine. The saw is made of iron, iron is easy to rust, the wound is likely to deteriorate. I will give him a prescription to stop the bleeding and prevent the wound from corrupting. I hope Lord Tianzun take care of him. The military doctor was stunned. Who is Master Tianzun? Your Majesty. The military doctor euphemistically said, "They believe in mountain gods, they may also believe in wolf gods, or Buddha." Man Bao changed his words eloquently, "I hope the gods they believe in will bless them, and our ancestors Bianke and Hua Tuo will also bless them." The medic stopped talking. The military doctor dealt with other injuries on his body. After bandaging, he was carried out. Whether he will survive will not be known until at least half a month. A wave of injuries came in, and the people in the medical tent were too busy to touch the ground. Finally, there were patients with minor injuries in the true sense. Some people broke their heads, and some people were slashed on their bodies. Not very deep. As soon as Man Bao and the others saw these lightly injured patients, they knew that the battle should be over, at least it was nearing the end, and they didn't need to continue to chase after them. Zhou Liru finally walked away from the wooden bed, and led by Erlang and Lu Huanmin to turn the tent to sew them up, bandage them with medicine. When there were more people behind, most of the newly arrived patients could not even get into the medical bills, so they were directly carried and put outside. So Zhou Liru took people out and treated the wounds against the sun. Man Bao and military doctors are in charge of severe and moderately wounded patients in the medical account. Because of Zhou Man and the others, the medical bill, which could only handle about a quarter of the injured, accommodated many severe and moderate patients who should have been abandoned. When Duan Shishi came over in a suffocating look, all he saw was a scene of wounded soldiers behind him. He was startled, his face sank, and he asked, "Injured so many people?" The logistics that had already been initially counted ran up and said, "Sir, 38 people have been killed, and now there are 169 people injured, of which 12 were seriously injured, and the rest were mostly minor injuries." He paused and said, "It looks like someone who was slashed in the shoulder is also temporarily classified as a minor injury." "Duan Inspector, what are you doing? Even minor injuries can be treated. Why should they be classified as minor injuries?" The logistics said, "This is the division of military doctors. It was originally a good idea to treat minor injuries first and then move serious injuries. Master Zhou came, and as long as she felt that there was still life, she would rescue them. Then these brothers who lacked arms and legs broke. In contrast, it is not very serious, and it can only be temporarily attributed to minor injuries." Inspector Duan went directly to the hospital tent and saw Zhou Liru squatting on the ground to restore the bones of a soldier who was crying and howling, a little girl in her teens. She didn't know where the courage came from, and she let the 4 soldiers hold her down. She just relaxed. He retracted his leg, and then pulled the leg forward with great force. After several times of pulling, he reached out to touch his bones, and sometimes massaged it directly on the injured leg. When she finally got the bones just right, she started to apply ointment, made it 3 and 5, and then tied the wooden board. "Okay, stop screaming, then you are not allowed to move your legs. After a while, your legs will grow longer." "All right," he said again, "I'll give you a bone recipe." The logistics who caught up continued to lean into Duan Inspector's ear and said, "Sir, this is the second thing Xiao wants to tell you. This Master Zhou and Dr. Zhou Xiao have prescribed a lot of other medicines, and those medicines are not in the army. It's on the list of purchases, so." "So what, you don't plan to treat it anymore?" Duan Inspector glanced at him and asked, "The prescription has been put away, go back and talk about it." "Logistics, sir, there is no money for logistics." Inspector Duan touched his chin and said, "Let's take credit with those herbal medicine dealers first, and then find a pharmacy for a batch of credit. Where do we have the money? Wait for the autumn harvest, when the autumn tax will come up, cry with the court, and move it over to pay the bill. If you can't, ask your majesty again to see if the Ministry of Household can support it." Although he thought it was impossible, the adults in the household department were the most eccentric, and would definitely not see their difficulties in Liangzhou. However, the taxes to the imperial court can still be rubbed off, but it is a pity that his political achievements may be hit or miss again. Thinking of this, Duan Inspector's eyes became even brighter when he looked at the medical account. If they were willing to have a good word with the prince, it might be possible. So Duan Inspector raised a smile and walked towards the medical bill with enthusiasm. Bai Shan, who came out with a basin of blood, was stunned when he saw him, and then greeted him enthusiastically, "Master Duan, is the bandit suppression over? See you tomorrow." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2190. Inspector Duan was also very enthusiastic, and quickly said, "You really have a laboring son, how can you let you do such rough work? Come on." Immediately, a soldier stepped forward to take the wooden basin, but Bai Shan did not hesitate, handed it over to him and said, after pouring it down, "Go get another basin of hot water." Then he spoke to Governor Duan, "Is it possible for your lord to suppress the bandits?" This time, with the help of Lai Nai's army, the bandit leader and the third in command of the horse thief were all arrested, and ran away to the second in command, but Nai's army led someone to chase. Inspector Duan was still very confident and said, "There are only 5 people on the other side who can escape, so they shouldn't be able to escape." Nai Kenjun brought more than 100 people to chase, and this time the chance of winning was the greatest ever. Bai Shan said, "It's good to be able to catch it, but if we can't catch it, we took the thieves from the mountains, and they won't be able to do anything when they come back." Inspector Duan sighed, "I have searched the den of thieves, there are some stolen goods, but not much." He remembered something, and said with a toothache on his face, "We dug out 2 carts of goods from the thief's den that we didn't have time to release. I heard that it belonged to Mr. Bai's friend, Mr. Yu. Go back and let him go to Liangzhou Prefect's mansion to do it. Just register and take it away." Bai Shan thanked Inspector Duan on behalf of Mr. Yu, and continued to bring the topic back to the stolen goods, saying, "As long as the things are still in the mountains, they can be found, unless they transfer the things to the city or other places." After thinking about it, Duan Inspector shook his head and said, "It can't be in Liangzhou City. I know that these horse thieves often come and go in and out of Liangzhou City. Suzhou City is too far away, and it is inconvenient for them to access money. Every time they break up, they will come back. I'm sure that things are hidden in the mountain, but..." Duan Inspector turned his head and glanced at the mountain, pursed his lips and said, "Although this mountain is not very big, but it's not too small. I have sent people to search the mountain twice, but I couldn't find their treasures. No one confessed. Those who are willing to confess don't know, and those who know don't want to tell. But now the bandit leader has also been arrested." Duan Inspector pondered, "It makes sense, I'll arraign the bandit leader in a while." After the two of them finished talking, Duan Inspector asked about the medical bills. Bai Shan said, "The other thing is not enough. Some urgently needed medicinal materials are not enough." Inspector Duan had a headache, so he could only say, "Just wait until I get back to Liangzhou City." He bowed his head and entered the hospital tent. As soon as he entered, he saw that Zhou Man was holding a knife to open the flesh and blood. After separating the flesh and blood, he used a clip to pick out an arrow. Because taking it out will hook the flesh and blood, making it difficult to recover, and it may cause heavy bleeding. But when Zhou Man took out the arrow, he didn't see much blood coming out, and there was very little flesh and blood. She didn't notice Duan Shishi came in, so she expedited the treatment of the injury on her hand, and then started stitching after the bleeding stopped slightly. She said to the military doctor, "The arrow wound looks smaller than the knife wound, but it is actually more difficult to suture, because the arrowhead was taken out with there is some flesh and blood, so that it cannot be completely anastomosed." At this time, attention should be paid to the preservation and symmetry of the meridians. It is necessary to preserve as many meridians as possible so that they can survive, so that the flexibility will not be too affected after recovery. Especially it is the deep arrow wound that should be paid more attention to. As she spoke, she sutured and taught military doctors how to anastomose meridians and suture. Even the layman Duan Shishi listened with gusto. Although not very understandable. The military doctor stood aside like a child and listened carefully. When she was finally sutured, she took the medicine to stop the bleeding and bandaged it. Man Bao twisted his stiff neck. When he turned his head and saw Duan Shishi, his eyes lit up and asked, Du Shi, is the suppression of the bandits over? Inspector Duan nodded. Nikenjun brought people to chase Urge and others, and only ran 5. We can return to the city triumphantly when we catch them back. The treasure was found. Duan Inspector felt that Bai Shan and Zhou Man were very concerned about the treasure. Although they agreed that after finding the treasure, they would get 28 points, and if they were responsible for finding it, it would be 37 points, but wouldn't it be possible to find all of them? As for the ones in the den of thieves, they detained some and had to return some to Master Yu, but in fact, there were not many. Which of these people is short of money? Just before Duan Inspector was about to shake his head, Man Bao said, if you find it, can you please send someone back to Liangzhou first, and then send some medicinal materials? Inspector Duan said, when the bandit suppression is over, these wounded soldiers will be sent back to Liangzhou city. Man Bao said, there are some wounded soldiers who should not be moved. Others must be bandaged before they can move. Otherwise, they will be sent back by a car. After running around all day, the blood will dry out. Inspector Duan was stunned, and couldn't help but look at Bai Shan. Bai Shan said innocently, Sir Duan, I'm not a doctor, so I naturally listened to the doctor. Even the military doctor was a little more courageous, and came up and said, yes, sir, it is not suitable for many people to move, at least 2 or 3 days of medicinal materials must be prepared. Inspector Duan glanced at him, and the military doctor immediately shrank his neck and did not dare to speak. He was caught in the army because of a crime. Although he was a military doctor, he was still a prisoner in essence. Man Bao glanced at Inspector Duan. This time, it was a little embarrassing to switch to the provincial governor. He thought about it for a while, and finally gritted his teeth and said, okay, I will send someone back to buy medicine immediately, and Imperial Physician Zhou will give me a prescription. Man Bao nodded. Without wasting any time, he asked Bai Shan to bring up the next wounded soldier. I want you to write. Bai Shan nodded and turned to get pen, ink, and paper. What Man Bao wants are all the medicines that are urgently needed at the moment. There are not many varieties. There are only 22 kinds of medicines when they are full. Inspector Duan took a look at the list and found that he couldn't figure it out, so he pulled the logistics aside and asked, how much? The purchase of medicinal materials is all logistical responsibility. He really knows the price of medicines. Even if some medicines do not know the current price, he can roughly estimate them. He figured out the abacus, and after a while, he said, sir, it's about 264 taels. Inspector Duan felt pain in the flesh. How much does it cost for 2 or 3 days of medicinal materials? The logistics reminded, sir, this is the medicine money for 169 people. There are a few medicinal herbs for qi and blood that are relatively expensive. The logistics whispered, sir, brothers are watching. Prefect Duan glanced around, lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, can I not know? These 264 taels don't seem like a lot now, but after they go back, they will have to take care of their injuries for at least a month or 2. Can we afford it? The cost in the back shouldn't be so big. The logistics asked hesitantly, Sir Mean. Inspector Duan gritted his teeth, okay, you first send someone back to buy medicine and get money from the governor's mansion. The logistics have not been moved, and it is difficult for the money from the garrison to go to the official account of the governor's house, and it is difficult for him to get the money even if he goes back. When Duan Shishi saw that he didn't move, he reacted, and finally he pulled the purse on his waist, took out the private seal from it and gave it to him, saying, forget it, go to my house to find my wife to get it, and I will make money from the governor's mansion when I get back. The logistics immediately responded happily. As for whether the latter section of the governor can get money from the governor's mansion, who cares? See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2191. Seeing that he was gone, Duan inspector turned around and went to interrogate the bandit leader. When Mr. Zhuang and Yin or the others heard that the war was over, they came over from his tower. As soon as they arrived at the camp, they saw the wounded all over the ground. They couldn't help but startled. How serious are the casualties? Sitting next to him, he stretched out his hand and asked Zhou Liru to bind the registered permanent residents and said, "Fortunately, few wounded soldiers died this time. Generally, at least half of the wounded soldiers carried off the battlefield will die, not to mention that many wounded soldiers have no chance to be carried off at all. This time, because two doctors, Zhou Man and Zhou Liru, were added to the medical account, and Zhou Man was still a very prestigious imperial doctor, the soldiers who were responsible for finding the wounded soldiers and carrying them down tried to carry them down as much as possible. Originally hurting the stomach and neck would not lift it down at all. Unexpectedly, there are fewer people dying like this than before. Joining the army was quite unexpected, so I saw Mr. Zhuang and Yin Or very favorably at this time, and specially pointed them the way. The imperial physician Zhou is still busy over there." Zhou Liru wrapped his mouth, put the needle and thread on a tray, got up without any expression, and walked to the next wounded soldier in 2 steps. Lu Huan, who was holding the tray, also stood up awkwardly, glanced at the wounded soldier and handed her a pair of scissors. Zhou Liru took it and cut the pants on his knees with 2 clicks. After exposing the wound, he began to clean it. During this period, he switched from scissors to knives and then to clips, and cleaned out the stones and other dirty things in the flesh and blood, and then cut them off. Some dead meat began to be bandaged with medicine. The wounded soldiers kept screaming, and the 2 squatting were expressionless. Yin Or looked curious, then crouched down beside Lu Huan and asked curiously, "How many patients have you seen today?" Lu Huan said, 32, this is the 33rd. Basically, we are responsible for such minor injuries. Even Bai Erlang ran into the medical account to help, so he could fight Zhou Liru. At first, the 2 of them comforted the injured person softly, but later they said that their throat was smoking and their expressions were numb, so they didn't want to speak. It was all trauma, and the injuries were similar. The same words were said several times with enthusiasm, and they were reluctantly accepted a dozen times. Yin could not understand his pain, but felt envious, so he got up and went to Zhou Man, wanting to see what he could do to help. Man Bao was cutting a hand for someone. This man was cut with a knife on his arm, and only a layer of skin was attached. Because he was left far away, he was only brought here now, although the person who brought him has already brought him here. She had been bandaged urgently, but she still lost too much blood, and she was in a coma at this time. Man Bao took off the messy clothes that wrapped the wound, and opened his arm to see that blood began to flow. She hurriedly pressed to stop the bleeding, and the bleeding was slowed down. He instructed Bai Shan, cut off all his shirt. He said to Bai Erlang, get the needle and let someone get the medicine for the 3rd prescription. Bai Erlang responded and went out quickly, only nodding when he saw Mr. Zhuang and Yin Or. Yin Or saw that not only his clothes were covered in blood, but even his face was covered in blood, and he was stunned for a while. Bai Erlang came back soon, gave the needle to Man Bao, and said, they went to get the medicine. Man Bao taught the military doctor how to press to stop the bleeding, and she would not stick the needle until he could use both hands to replace her. After the man's arm was completely sawed off, his wound was treated, and Man Bao had some blood on his face. Bai Shan brought the hammered medicine up, and she sewed it up. He lowered his head and gave the medicine carefully. The blood slowly leached out, then slowed down. Several people observed the cross-section together and determined that the bleeding was decreasing, and after it had slowly stopped, Man Bao bandaged the severed hand. The military doctor was not very confident. Sir, I think he may not be able to survive it. Man Bao thought about it. Actually, blood can be transfused. Bai Shan asked her, did you bring tools? Man Bao nodded, bring it. She turned around and said, in one of my boxes, I'll go get it. It's actually at Keek's place, but what does it matter, she has a suitcase of luggage, and only she knows what's inside. Man Bao ran back to the luggage cart, and quickly found the marked box, had someone move it to the tent where she was resting, and then opened the box by herself. She first took out the small box in the Keek space and put it in, and then started looking for reagents. After finding all the potions from the shelf, they put them in the small box. Man Bao went to the doctor's account with a small box. Hearing that she was going to give a blood transfusion, even Inspector Duan, who was interrogating the horse thief, dropped his whip and ran to see it. Man Bao threw them all out, this medical bill is not clean at all, and you all come together, it's even more unclean. But in the end, they were allowed to watch, because after the things were cleaned, the treasures needed to be blood drawn. As a result, many able-bodied soldiers were pulled to the door of the medical tent to line up. Zhou Liru, who had finally finished working with patients with mild illness, also ran over with great interest and volunteered, "Little ant, I'll prick their fingers." Man Bao nodded. So Zhou Liru happily took a very short silver needle and pricked their fingers to test their blood types. One of Man Bao's most famous medical skills in the capital, disembowelment and blood transfusion. They all took this class when they were in the imperial physician's office. Of course, it is not something that can be learned in a day or two. But they have also been learning this course for a year. Usually, they mainly use rabbits for experiments, and stitching is performed by various animals in turn. This is how Zhou Liru's stitching is practiced. As for blood transfusion, they only learned how to separate the serum, prepare the reagents, and then test the blood type. They never had the chance to do the last step of blood transfusion. This time they finally had the chance. Man Bao also gave her the opportunity to stand aside and point her. Teacher Mo said that whole blood is actually a little dangerous. The best blood is processed, but she obviously doesn't have the ability and speed to process it, so she can only use whole blood. While watching Zhou Liru test out a suitable blood type and then draw blood, she went into the hospital account and kept checking the condition of the wounded soldiers. She said to the military doctor, "He has the will to survive, which is a good thing, I hope it's too late." After Zhou Liru had drawn blood, she took the blood in nervously, and began to carefully puncture him for blood transfusion. She controlled the speed and couldn't help but look at the ant. Man Bao nodded slightly to her and said in approval, "Just do it." This is the last patient, so Man Bao has so much time to put on him. Several veterans couldn't help but turn their heads to look at the glow of the sky outside, and secretly said, "This kid is really lucky, he only needs to be delivered 2 times earlier. I'm afraid I can't use this, because he spends a lot of time, the doctors must first ensure the survival of the later. Otherwise, the time it takes to treat one person is enough to treat 3 people. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2192. By the time the blood was poured into the wounded soldier's body, the sky had completely darkened. Man Bao touched the other's pulse, sighed and said, "The pulse is better, let's see if he can wake up tomorrow." She was out of the medical account, and many tents had been set up outside, just surrounding the medical account and the tents of a few of them. All the wounded soldiers were carried to their tents to rest, and the scent of the air wafted in the air. Man Bao couldn't help taking a deep breath, and then he remembered that he didn't eat his lunch, or ate a cold steamed bun and 2 candies in the afternoon when he was too hungry. Bai Shan obviously knew that, and Man Bao said, "I have someone bring you hot water over there. You and you should go wash up first." Man Bao let out a sigh of relief, nodded again and pulled Zhou Liru back. There were several buckets of hot water in the tent. Man Bao found the clothes and washed them first. Zhou Liru also found his own clothes, and then sat outside the screen and chatted with her. At this moment, Her passion has revived again. Just thinking about the 35.5 patients she has handled independently today, she is very happy, especially since she has also received blood transfusion. More training in medicine. Man Bao said, it's all trauma, and it's only during wars. Usually, there should be more injuries from falls. Zhou Liru pondered, little aunt, what do you think about the trauma treatment that we stayed in the military camp for a period of time? Man Bao thought for a while and said, this method is really good. Doctors' medical skills are all piled up with patients. Maybe we can visit the garrison along the way. Zhou Liru nodded immediately, this method is good. Man Bao said while washing up, let Xiao Yuan Zheng discuss it with the Ministry of War when we go back. At that time, students from the Imperial Physician Department can go to the Ministry of War for training. However, most of the places where wars will be fought are border crossings, which are far from the capital. Zhou Liru, who had already gone to Liangzhou, was naturally not afraid of the long journey. She said, it's similar to our study tour this time. She said, when we graduate from the Imperial Physician's office, shouldn't we also go to local medical offices? Man Bao nodded, yes, go back and mention it with Xiao Yuan. The sound of water rushing behind the screen, Man Bao put on his middle clothes, wiped his hair and came out, and Zhou Liru went in to take a bath. Man Bao suddenly tilted his head and thought, will he refuse to agree to mention so many things to Xiao Yuan Zheng suddenly? Zhou Liru's vague voice came, it shouldn't be, Xiao Yuan Zheng is very reasonable. Man Bao pondered, Xiao Yuan is very reasonable, and I think I am also very reasonable, but I still think that Xiao Yuan will become unreasonable by raising too many opinions. So I should start from this time. Start getting him ready. So Man Bao decided to go back and write a letter to Xiao Yuan Zheng. It can be written as an official document, just to let the students of the Imperial Physician Office also prepare. Man Bao wiped his hair while planning, and when Zhou Liru washed it out, the two of them simply tied their hair with hair ties and went over. The dinner prepared by the Liangzhou army was very rich, with enough steamed buns, and a large pot of meat. There was even a whole sheep on the bonfire, which was almost roasted. Bai Shan and Bai Erlang Lu Huan also took a shower and came out with their half-dried hair tied with a hair band. Seeing them like this, Mr. Zhuang shook his head and said, be careful of catching a cold. Man Bao moved closer to the fire, we will be careful, we can drink a bowl of ginger soup later. Inspector Duan immediately said, I'll have someone cook it. Several people were very hungry, and they began to devote their heads to eating when the food came up. Duan Inspector and Mr. Zhuang sat on the side and watched them eat. Gradually, the smile on Duan Inspector's face could no longer be maintained. There are not many dishes, only 2 pots, but the quantity is large, there are 2 pots, and there is a basket of steamed buns. As a result, the 5 people moved gracefully, but their speed was not slow, and the bamboo basket with the steamed buns slowly emptied. Inspector Duan looked at their stomachs and the basin in front of them. After a while, he sighed, young people have such a good appetite. Mr. Zhuang was very proud, stroked his beard and smiled, they are growing. Duan Inspector asked someone to bring them another basket of steamed buns. Man Bao and the others exhaled, feeling that there was finally something in their stomachs. They didn't really mind that the steamed buns were gone, and they just set their sights on the roasted whole sheep. Inspector Duan smiled and took out a dagger, and took the initiative to cut the meat for them. Come on, let's eat the meat first. Everyone's eating speed slowed down, but their appetites were not bad, so Bai Shan was in the mood to ask about the interrogation. I didn't confess, but Nai Kenjun also brought back the second master. The 3 principals of the horse thief were all arrested, and none of the important people below were left behind. As long as the time is long enough, this official does not believe that they will not recruit. Man Bao said, we don't have so much time here, or I'll go up the mountain with you tomorrow. Inspector Duan was startled and asked, What does Imperial Dr. Zhou mean? Man Bao said nonsense in a serious manner, Master Duan doesn't know, my treasure hunt is very good. Bai Shan also followed the serious nonsense and nodded seriously, yes, that's why I said that if we find the treasure, it will be 3 or 7 points. Inspector Duan's eyes brightened slightly, but he didn't answer. Bai Shan continued, Master Duan, they will definitely not confess for a while. Could it be that they will recruit after a year and a half, and you will only find the treasure after a year and a half? You must know that there are many people on this grassland, and there are always the clever ones will come and try their luck. You can't always send troops and horses to guard here, if you can't recruit treasures, the cost of troops and horses stationed here. That must be painful. Inspector Duan asked, how sure are you? This kind of thing depends on fate. Bai Shan didn't give a positive answer, but said, but it's better than putting all hope on those bandit leaders. Inspector Duan said, okay, tomorrow you will go up the mountain with the army to search. Bai Shanban and Man Bao looked at each other and laughed happily. Mr. Zhuang reminded, don't forget the patients in the medical account. Man Bao said, before I go up the mountain, I will see the seriously injured ones, and leave the rest to Li Ru and the military doctor. Zhou Liru was surprised, little ant, don't I go up the mountain? Man Bao was surprised, why are you going up the mountain? Zhou Liru thought about it too, nodded and said, yes, then I'll stay. Man Bao asked others. Lu Huan has been working hard all day, and he has never been as tired as today. His legs are shaking a little at the moment, and when he thinks of climbing the mountain, he immediately shakes his head, I'm not going. Although treasure hunt is a good saying, but Inspector Duan couldn't find it twice after searching the mountain. How could they find it so easily? Bai Erlang was also tired, but he was very confident in Zhou Man and Bai Shan, so he said cheerfully, I'll go. Yin Or hesitated for a while, but still said, I won't go, I'll stay in the camp to help. The Yin family's family will breathe a sigh of relief. Climbing the mountain is very tiring. If the young master goes, most of them will have to carry it on their backs. See you tomorrow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2193. The mountains are dense with trees, and many places seem untouched, so it is difficult to search. Duan Inspector also followed them into the mountain to search, and as soon as they entered the mountain, they were divided into several teams, and their team went directly to the den of thieves. Oh, the cottage. The stockade is behind a large rock. Most of the mountains on the grassland are not high, and this one is naturally not very steep, but with this mountain wall, the stockade is directly isolated inside, and such cottages that are easy to defend and difficult to attack are rare. Inspector Duan said, because of this barrier, they are always invincible. He suppressed bandits 4 times, but only twice drove people out of this grassland and entered this cottage, and one of them planned for half a year, using the caravan as bait to lead most of the horse thieves in the cottage out of the mountain, and then suppress them. Kill them, and then send people forward to lure the enemy, and then they will be dispersed and driven out. But this time, it was because they had attacked the cottage last time, and they had searched the mountain and had a general understanding of the situation in the mountain. Only when the genius was bright, the people in the cottage were sleepy and went around the other path to guard the guards. Attacked only after killing people. Inspector Duan took them in. Bai Shan and the others saw the messy house inside and couldn't help but dislike it. There are so many of them, why don't they build the house more neatly? Inspector Duan, they are thieves, this is a den of thieves, not a city. Man Bao looked left and right, and asked, in such a big place, they didn't hide the treasure here. Inspector Duan said, we have searched carefully, and this is not the first time. Although there is a lot of property found, it is very different from what we expected. The thief's den is not without any property at all. There are still some gold, silver, jewelry, cloth, and tea, etc., but no one believes that this is all the property of the horse thieves. They are so poor, why do they want to be horse thieves? Is it irritating to tie your head to the belt of your pants? It was the first time for Man Bao and the others to enter the den of thieves, so they were very curious. Adhering to the principle of increasing knowledge, several people visited in great detail. Oh no, they searched the den of thieves. There is something hidden in the place about 219 paces, and about 560 paces behind the right. This is a unit of measurement that Man Bao is very familiar with. Man Bao responded in his heart, and did not take people directly, but still followed everyone with great interest to search it out. The location Keek reported to her must be a place where a lot of things are hidden, but each thief must also have private wealth, and Man Bao thinks that they should also have a little something hidden. She is interested in scavenger hunts. Keek didn't urge her either, and saw her kicking a door open, and then swaggering in. Bai Erlang was startled by the sound of the door hitting the wall, and complained, "Can't you be gentle? That's the way to have momentum. Isn't this what the book says when the officers and soldiers searched?" Man Bao said, "It's very fierce, so you can break into the door directly, and then you can find any treasure." She had a very good reason. Anyway, these houses will not be inhabited in the future. They are considered abandoned. Why not kick them? The officials, Duan Shishi, and the army, soldiers, on the side did not speak in silence. Did they treat them as minions? Bai Shan tilted his head to think, turned his head and said to Inspector Duan, "Why don't you push these houses down so that no one else will go up the hills and fall to the grass in the future?" Inspector Duan, demolishing a house also requires manpower and material resources. Bai Shan shook the unstable door, looked up at these dusty houses, didn't quite understand, what kind of manpower and material resources would it take to demolish such a house? Man Bao said excitedly, "Then we dismantled it for you." Inspector Duan stretched out his hand, "Dr. Zhou is free." He didn't understand very much. He was obviously tired all day. Today, the military doctor almost couldn't get out of bed. Zhou Liru also shouted that his feet hurt. Man Bao turned around the room, saying that she was casual, and that she would not be careful when rummaging for things. Bai Shan and Bai Erlang also let go of their hands and feet, and the three kept throwing things out. Inspector Duan saw the wooden shelves and various sundries falling in front of him, and he was speechless for a while. He couldn't help saying, "Master Zhou, our people have searched these houses." He thought they were looking for clues to the treasure, not to search the horse thief's house again. Man Bao turned a deaf ear and said perfunctorily, "Let's look for it." When she was talking, she had already dismantled the bed in half, then climbed in to see it, and said happily after a while, "There is really a hole in it." When Bai Shan and Bai Erlang heard this, they immediately threw away the things in their hands and ran up, "Take a pottery and see if there is anything strange in the mud, maybe someone will dig holes and lay wooden boards and mud to hide things." Man Bao tapped inside and said, "It's okay to go underground." After a while, she let out a wow, and then Inspector Duan saw her legs move quickly, and crawled out after a while. She didn't get up, she just sat on the ground, stretched out both hands, and Inspector Duan almost came out. Blinded. He widened his eyes, "This is..." Lao Bai Shan and Bai Erlang were more excited than him, and quickly asked, "With so many gems, are there any more in them?" Man Bao shook his head, "No, this one is wrapped in oiled paper, there are 7 in total." Man Bao picked out the best looking one and stuffed it into his purse. When he was halfway through, he remembered something, and immediately gave one to Bai Shan, Bai Erlang, and Duan Inspector, and said with a smile, "Whoever sees it has a share, whoever sees it has a share." Duan Shishi. He took it silently, then gave the personal soldier a wink. The personal soldiers left, and after a while, the soldiers who were perfunctory searching around immediately rushed into each room like a wolf and began to turn over the wall behind the bed. Bai Shan and Bai Erlang separated, and immediately dragged Man Bao to the other room. Seeing that there were people all the way, the three of them went to the innermost. The yard in the middle belonged to the bandit leader and his henchmen, and even the house was bigger and cleaner than others. Inspector Duan said, they occupied a few women they robbed. Man Bao waved his hand and said, go, search. So Duan Shishi didn't finish speaking and the three of them rushed in. One started to drill under the bed, the other started to look for things in the bathroom, and the other started to rummage through boxes. It was true that the boxes and the contents in the cabinets were turned out, and even a piece of clothing was taken away as stolen goods, so now the cabinets and boxes are empty. Bai Shan directly turned the box over, pushed the cabinet over, and then knocked on it. Under Duan Shishi's gaze, he pried open a corner of the cabinet, and then took out two thick pieces of gold. Bai Shan waited and was not sure about the weight, so he handed it over to Daji. Daji waited and said, about 4 or 2. Duan Shishi's eyes are straight, 4 taels of gold is 40 taels of silver, and copper coins. See you at 6 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 2194. Inspector Duan couldn't help turning his head to look at the guards. He wanted to shake his shoulders. How did they search? Man Bao got out from under the bed. Duan Inspector looked at her hands subconsciously, and was relieved when she saw that her hands were empty, but she got up and started to pull the bed out. Daji stepped forward to help. After the bed was removed, Man Bao climbed onto the bed and jumped to the innermost place, stomping on the ground, then picked up a piece of wood scattered on the ground and scraped the ground, revealing a layer of wood below. She pried open the board, then reached out and slowly took out a jar from inside. This kind of jar is too familiar, the wine jar, the pickle jar are all it, the big belly can accommodate it. Man Bao opened the jar, stretched out his hand and took out a silver ingot. Duan Inspector could see at a glance that it was the official seal of Shiliang. She continued to dig things out. There was gold, it was very small, it looked like 5 or 2, but there were several. In the end, she grabbed a dozen gems and a handful of pearls. Inspector Duan no longer wanted to speak. Bai Shan exclaimed, there must be a little boss who lives in this house. Inspector Duan said feebly, this is the residence of the third head of the horse thief. Going further is the second head, and the big one in the middle is the head of the bandit. Man Bao immediately put things into the jar. Come on, let's go and see. Bai Shan turned his head left and right. Where's Erlang? Bai Erlang made a scream in the bathroom, and everyone ran over immediately. Seeing that he was riding on the neck of a white guard, holding the beam with both hands, when he saw them coming in, he immediately said, here, there is a small box. Too bad he can't get it. In the end, Daji went up to help him take down the small box. It's not a big box, but he hollowed out the beams and plugs, and the box was stuffed inside. The box should be made of similar trees, so the colors are similar. There is no box in there. Not to mention that the people who searched only looked up from the bottom and swept the beams with things, which was even more difficult to find. Bai Erlang opened the box with great interest, and found that there were clothes inside, which were still in tatters. He couldn't help but stay for a while. However, Man Bao vaguely smelled something else, so he reached out and pressed it hard. Bai Erlang also reacted, and immediately took the tightly packed clothes out, and then everyone saw that there was still a box wrapped in the clothes. He took out the box, sniffed and said, it smells. As soon as he opened it, he was suddenly disappointed. It's a spice, what kind of fragrance is this? Inspector Duan couldn't help but said, this is suhexiang, a spice that is only produced in the Suhi area. Do you know how expensive suhexiang is? A fingernail is worth a tale of gold. The three of them were stunned when they heard it. They looked at the golden incense sticks in the box and asked, "How many fingernails does this cost?" "No matter how many fingernails," an inspector grabbed Bai Erlang's hand, closed the box, and said sincerely to Bai Shan, "Today, I finally saw the treasure hunting ability of Bai Gongzi and Lord Zhou, and I will let people remember it. Next, go back and write down 30% of the account." Bai Shan stretched out his hand to hold the box, and said with a smile, "Inspector Duan is being polite. What are these? It's just the private money hidden by individual thieves? The bulk of it is the treasure hidden by the bandits together. That's the most important thing." When Duan Inspector heard this, he reluctantly retracted his hand, squeezed out a smile and said, "Yes, these things were found by young Master Bai and Lord Zhou. They are yours. Keep them all, keep them." Man Bao gave Bai Erlang a wink. Seeing that her eyes were cramping, Bai Erlang deliberately froze for a while, and when she blinked more and more, he chose a small piece of incense from the box to share with the Inspector Duan. Inspector Duan poured out the money in the purse and the gems that the witnesses had a share of, stuffed it into his sleeve pocket, and then carefully packed the spices in the purse. Although there is only one piece, it should be able to sell for dozens of taels of gold. After doing this, the money for medicine in a few days will come out. Inspector Duan thought about it, turned his head and showed a friendly smile to the three of them, swept away the sluggishness in the morning, and said very enthusiastically, let's go to the next room to look for it. You don't know, this horse thief second in command is very good. Cunning and thoughtful, the bandit leader relies heavily on him, maybe he has more things in his house. Ergo, what they've seen, is really cunning, so they ran over to look for it. But after looking through it, I found that all the rooms were very clean, and there was nothing there, and some of them were also searched by the soldiers. After finding it, Man Bao finally couldn't help but ask Keek, there is nothing in this house except what you found in the yard early in the morning. Today, when Man Bao was looking for things in various houses, he specially told Keek not to tell her specifically, let her find it by herself, and when she heard her question, it said proudly, yes, there is nothing hidden in this room, and you didn't find the last room clean, and there are still a few silver ingots in the firewood room. Man Bao didn't care much about the silver ingots in the firewood room next door. She could go back and get them, or the soldiers should find them when they searched again. She was surprised that Ergo didn't have any hidden belongings. Could it be that the place in the yard was his private hideaway, not that of thieves? But there should be a lot of things that can be specially marked as treasures by Keek, and they are very precious, right? Man Bao walked to the yard as she thought about it. She walked under a big tree according to Keek's instructions, then looked down at the potholes under her feet, and asked, under this? Did they dig deep enough? Keek said, no, not underground. Not underground? Man Bao's eyes lit up, and without waiting for Keek to finish, he shouted, I see, it's in the tree. Bai Shan and Bai Erlang heard this as soon as they went out. They were surprised and ran over immediately, really? Duan Inspector couldn't help but quickly stepped forward, and then everyone looked at the big tree in front of them. This is a banyan tree. I don't know how many years it has been growing. The trunk is very large and the leaves are still lush. After a careful look, we found that this tree is about to occupy half of the yard. Inspector Duan touched his chin and said, looking at this house, it is much further forward than other houses. From this look, he deliberately encloses this banyan tree in the wall. Originally, how good would it be to leave such a big tree on the road for everyone to enjoy the shade and chat? How did he specifically include it with a fence? Inspector Duan couldn't help but marvel, Master Zhou is amazing, you can see treasures with discerning eyes, no matter how treacherous he is, he will have nothing to hide in front of you. Man Bao knew that this was not his own credit, so he bowed his head shyly and said modestly, where, it's actually average. See you at 9.